Hello again, everybody. In this video, we are going to look at another one of the looping constructs that is in the Python language, and that's called the while loop. I'm going to use a couple of lists that I've just copied and pasted into here. So I've got my list of states, and I've got the list of temperatures that's shown here in the second line. So now let's just take a look at the while loop, and I'll use an example that's similar to what we've used before. So here is an example of the while loop. The syntax for the while loop is the word while, and you notice that we've seen this quite a few times now. You begin with some key word on the left, and then there's an indentation below that representing all the statements that are internal to that structure. So we've seen this with the for loop, we've seen this with the definition of functions, we've seen it with the if statements. So that's pretty much a standard syntax that Python's going to obey. Following the while, then we have a relational expression very similar to the if statement. So this will always be something that evaluates to true or false. So unlike the for statement that lets us loop through things in such as a list or to read items from a file, the while loop has a relational expression afterwards. So that has to be something that evaluates to true or false, and then we have the colon to terminate the first line over here. So this example is just going to go through my list of states, and it will print them out. So I've set the index equal to 0 to begin with, and the while loop is going to go until the index, well, it is going to continue as long as the index is less than the length of the states. So my expression here is index less than the length of states. So the length of states, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we have 6 states there. So as long as the index is less than 6, then we're going to stay in the loop. Inside the loop, I am just going to print out each of the states that's in the list by using the square bracket notation in the index. So to begin with, index is 0. So states sub 0 will be the first state, which is North Carolina. Then I add 1 to index and go back to the top of the loop and do the test again. So that's how the loop works. When you reach the last statement of the loop, it doesn't continue to go further, go down the page. It goes back up to the top of the loop where you perform the test again. So when we add 1 to 0, we get 1 for index, and the next test, index, is still less than 6, so this remains true. So I print out states index 1, and that would be California. Okay, then we add 1 to index, making it 2. 2 is still less than the length of the states, so that becomes true, and we print out index sub 2. So 0, 1, 2, so now we get Washington. So this will continue until we get all the way over to the end. Now, eventually, the index is going to become equal to the length of the states. So after we have printed out, let's see, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So after we've printed out index number 5, then we add 1, and that becomes 6. Okay, now 6 is no longer less than the length of the states. Okay, 6 is equal to 6, but it's not less than. So when this statement becomes false, we skip past those 2 lines of code, and we do whatever follows down here. All right, so that's how the while loop works. In a way, it's sort of like the if statement that's repeated over and over again. It's sort of like an if statement that would be repeated over and over again. The if statement does not. The if statement strictly goes top to bottom. Now, this could much more easily be done with a for loop, as we've seen before. The for loop and list go naturally together, but this just illustrates that we can do the same thing with a while loop. All right, so just to prove that we can do this, let's compile, and we don't compile with Python. Let's just run the program. Now we can look at the output. And from this loop, you can see we do go through the list and we print out each of the 6 states that we have in the list. So that's an alternate way to process the items in a list, but as you know already, the for loop is better designed to do that kind of thing. All right, well, let's look at another example. And for this time, I'm going to use the high temperatures. Okay, so I'm just going to get another example of the while loop, and I'll copy it and I'll paste it here. So I have to set some things up prior to the while loop. You don't have to do as much preparation if you're working with the for loop, and I'll get to that shortly. But with the while loop, we do have to do some of our own maintenance. So I'm going to set the variable temperature equal to 0, and I'm going to set something called the max temperature, max underscore temp, to the first temperature in the list. Okay, so that's going to give it the value 88.9. Then I am going to set the variable index equal to 1. Now, the purpose of this loop is to find the highest temperature in the list. So I'm going to use a similar kind of thing that I did with this loop up here. So while the index is less than the length of my list high temperatures, I want to continue to go through this loop over and over and over again, and it contains an if statement. So to begin with, index was, we looked at index 0 here, so we've already looked at that value, 88.9. So then I'm going to set index to 1 to go through the rest of the list. So let's look at this if statement. If the high temperatures of the index is greater than our current maximum temperature, then we're going to reset the maximum temperature. We will reset it to whatever the current high temperature value of the list is. So when the index is 1, the temperature is 91.5. All right, well, high temperatures index number 1 is 91.5. It really is greater than max temp, which was 88.9. So I will reset max temp to the current high temperatures index. That will make it 91.5. Then we go back to the top of the loop, except I'm missing something here. I have to add 1 to my index. Okay, so that's not automatically done, so I have to do that. So let's put the value in here to do that, the line of code that will do that. So we'll add 1 to the index, then we'll go back to the top of the loop. You know, if I didn't add 1, then the index would remain 1, and we would never exit that loop. It would be an infinite loop. Okay, 1 could never get to the length of our list of high temperatures. So now, as we go through the loop, we'll add 1 each time, and then eventually we do get to the end, and then we exit the loop. Let's look at the indentation. Okay, so if is indented there, and the index has the same indentation. So that means that this whole thing is part of the while loop. And again, the indentation is critical. If I happen to make the mistake and I tab over here, then all of a sudden the index is part of the if statement. And I don't want that. Okay, I always want to increment the index. I don't want to increment it only if this condition is true. Okay, so be very careful about your indentations. So I'll back that up, and now the if and the index equals index plus 1, those are all within the body of the while loop. Now, as we go through here, we're going to find the maximum value. So when we finish, let's print out that maximum value. So I'm going to just copy from my notes, and I'll paste in this print statement, and let's put a space there. So after the while loop, our maximum temperature is, and then we'll print out that maximum temperature. All right, so here's an example of a while loop that will find the largest temperature in the list, and then we'll print it out. Now let's run the program and look at the output. Here's the output window. And here we go. Okay, here's the while loop. That's from the last print statement here. The maximum temperature is 100.2. So if we look at the list, then we really can see that that maximum temperature, 100.2, that's the one that's on the far right. So that's the hottest temperature out of all of our high temperatures. So the while loop was able to find that high temperature for us. All right, now, this could be done a little bit more efficiently if we did a for loop. So just to go back and review that, let's do the same thing, and let's use the for loop. Like I said, the for loop is intended to go with lists, so it's a much more efficient method. So now let's do that same example with a for loop. All right, so I'm going to set the max temperature equal to 0 this time. Okay, I'm just going to give it an initial starting value because I know that all the temperatures in the list are hotter than 0, so this will be replaced. Then we can use our typical for loop. Okay, we can make up a variable for temp in high temperatures. Then that will go through the loop, and we don't have to use the index method. We don't need to use the square brackets. But then we have a similar if statement. Okay, so if the temp that we're currently looking at is greater than max temp, then we just reset max temp to the temperature we're currently holding from the list. Okay, so that does the same thing, and it's an easier way to do it. And then we'll print out the maximum temperature from that for loop, and we'll see that it is the same thing. So let's just run it again. And I'll bring over the output. So now you can see that we have the while loop, and that gave us the 100.2, and so does the for loop. Okay, so that gave us 100.2 as well. So both of those work. Well, given that, why would you ever want to use this while loop? Why not just use the for loop all the time? Well, the reason is there are some things you really can't do very well with the for loop. Let's look at an example here. Suppose we want to input a certain number of grades, and we want to determine the, whoops, that's the wrong one. So I don't want to do that. I copied and pasted the wrong thing. Okay, so let's go get the other code. Now let's try this again. Compute the grade average. So I'm going to skip a line. I'll print out compute grade average, skip another line. And with the while loop, you do need to set some things up in advance. Okay, so I am going to input a grade. So consider this a homework grade. So I'm going to set the first one to 0. If I'm computing the average, then I need to sum up all of the scores, count how many I have, and then just divide them to get the average. So I want to set the loss to 0 there. So average is 0.0. So I need to initialize several things that I'm going to use in the while loop. Now let's look at the beginning of the while loop. So let's put this here. And this, I'm going to do this, let's get some space there. I'm going to get the first input grade before I get to the loop. All right, so the prompt is going to be, enter a grade, or when you're finished, type in a -1. So a -1 isn't a legitimate grade. It wouldn't be confused with a grade. So that's going to be our what we call a sentinel value to indicate, hey, we're done with all of the grades. Go ahead and do the computation. Now the while loop looks like this. Okay, while the grade is not equal to a -1, that means we don't want to quit. Okay, as long as we have a good grade, 78, 99, 55, whatever it might be, as long as it isn't -1, then we want to process that grade. All right, so the calculations that go along with this will be the following. So let's put those in here, and I'll have to watch my indentations again. So we have the first input for the grade outside the loop. Grade is not equal to -1, so we need to do a running sum. So sum starts out with 0. I add in the grade that I just read. I add that to the old value of sum, and then I save the new result as the new value of sum. So here's a very common computer science language statement. It doesn't look like algebra, and it isn't. It's an assignment statement. So the assignment statement says take the current value of sum, add to that the grade you just read, and reassign that new sum to the variable sum. Now, each time we input a grade, we need to count them because we need to know how many there are in order to do an average. So I just add 1 to the number, and then we're ready to input the next grade. So we will continue to go through this loop over and over again until finally we're all done with the grades and we type in a -1 when we're finished. After that, we want to compute the average and print that out. So we need a couple more lines of Python code to do that. So let's put that down here. Now, notice again the indentation. The while loop contains those 3 statements because all of them are indented the same. The average does not belong to the while loop. It's over here on the left-hand side. Okay, so it's not part of the while loop. if it were indented, it would be part of the while loop. Okay, so be careful with that. I keep having all kinds of trouble with that. So we will complete the entering of all the grades. Then we'll type in a -1. Then we'll exit the loop and we'll compute the average. So the average is just a running sum, the cumulative sum divided by how many grades we had, and then we just print out the average here. All right, now this example would not work very well with a for loop because you do not know in advance how many grades you're going to have. So with a for loop, how would you do that? You would typically we use like a range, for n in range 6 or something like that. But that doesn't fit this kind of problem. So the while loop will be more efficient, or it's easier to use with this kind of problem. So let's run this example and let's enter some grades and compute the average. So let's go ahead and run the program. And it should come up just fine. It does. And here we are. All right, so we are at the point where we are going to compute the grade average. So we have our prompt from the first statement up here, the one at the top of the loop. We have that one. And I didn't mean to do that, so here we go. So we are asking, or the program is prompting, enter a grade or -1 when finished. Okay, so I'll enter a grade. Let's do 87, and I'll type enter. So that I did not enter a -1. I entered an 87. Okay, so we went through the loop. We added the 87 to 0, we added 1 to 0, and then we're prompting for the next input here at the bottom. Okay, so we have this last line that's prompting for an input. So we'll continue to do this. So let's put 91, and we've got another grade. So let's suppose we have a 78. Now let's do a 95, and let's suppose I've only got one more grade. Okay, so let's suppose that was an 89, and there. So I've entered 5 grades, and those are the only grades I have. So to indicate that I'm finished, I'm going to type in -1. That will cause the loop to exit, and then we'll compute the average and print it out. So when I hit enter, then here we go. We got the average is 88. So this loop, this kind of loop, or this kind of problem is perfect for a while loop. So we entered, again, look at the loop. Okay, we kept entering grades, and as long as we entered something that was not -1, we just stayed in the loop over and over again. When I typed in -1, that was the signal to exit, so this test failed. Okay, while grade's not equal to -1, well, when grade is -1, that whole thing there will be false. So we'll exit the loop, compute the average, and then print out the result. So now that's an example of an application where you would use a while loop. Let's look at another one. Let's suppose we have a kind of a guessing game. Okay, so let's look at a problem where we can use the while loop. So let's put the code here for that. And the comment says, guess a hidden number between 1 and 100. So this is going to be kind of a guessing game problem. So let's set a variable called hidden number to 61, and let's prompt for an input that would guess the number. Okay, so it's going to be called guess, and we'll type out to the screen or print to the screen, enter your guess, and the input statement reads it in. Now, as you've learned so far, we have to be consistent with the type. So if this thing is a number, then we have to convert that input to a number. So that's why we need the int over here. Now, we are going to tell our player, our game player, whether or not their guess is low or high, and we'll let them continue to guess. So let's start with our while loop. Okay, so let's get the while loop and put it in here. So we'll put that next. And here is the while loop, the top part of it. So we have while, guess, not equal to hidden number. So if we guessed 87, then guess 87 is not equal to 61, so we want to stay in the loop. So we want to continue to stay in the loop until we guess the number. Inside the loop, we need to tell our player if they guessed high or low. So to do that, we need to have an if statement or two. So let's paste in an if statement. So inside the loop, if the guess is less than the hidden number, then we are going to tell them that's too low, guess again. And as part of that statement, we'll use the input. Okay, we'll do two things at once. We'll print this message to the screen, and we'll also let them input their new guess, which will be stored here. Right? Well, if it's not too low, then it's too high, isn't it? So we could use an else clause here. So we can copy and paste that in. And if the guess is less than the hidden number, then we give them this input. If the guess is greater than the hidden number, we can use the else here, and we'll say the input is too high, guess again. So we're either going to tell them too low or too high. Now, alternately, we could have used another if statement right there. We could have said if guess is greater than hidden number, and we could print out the same thing. So there are many ways to do a problem with code, regardless if it's Python or something else. So this now, all of that code is inside the loop. So the if statement with the else, that's inside the while loop, and then we have the if statement with guess. You know, this line is inside the if statement. That line is inside the else statement. Once the user guesses the right number, which will help them get there, so they will guess the right number, and then this will become false. If the guess is equal to the hidden number, that expression will be false, and we'll exit the loop. We'll not do this. So below the loop, then we need to print out some message indicating that they did guess the number. So let's put a line of code here for that. And let's do that. Okay. After you exit the loop, you win, the number was, and hidden number. All right. Now, we know the numbers between 1 and 100. And we could actually do that down here. We could say, enter your guess between 1 and 100 if we wanted to, but you get the idea. That would be easy to put in. So now, let's run the program, and let's try out our guessing game. So I'll do run. And here we go. So I've got to put in the inputs for the grades so we get past that example. So let's do some grades, 87, 89, 98, and let's do another here, 95. And let's suppose we only had those 4. So I'll do a -1, enter, and we get past the example where we're doing the grade average. Now we're down to the guessing game. Okay, enter your guess. Okay, I'm going to guess 90. And now, okay, that's too high. Guess again. Okay, so looking at the while loop, 90 is not equal to 61. And 90 is not less than the hidden number. So we end up doing the else part down here. Too high, guess again. So we can guess again here. So I'll try 50. And now it's too low. Guess again. Well, now I know it's between 50 and 90. So with a few more guesses, I can probably get there. That's too low. All right, between 90 and 50. So let's try 70. Okay, that's too high. So now I know it's between 70 and 50. Too high, guess again. Let's try 65. Okay, still too high. So now it's between 65 and 50. Okay, how about 55? Okay, that's too low. Okay, so it's between 55 and 65. Let's try 60. Okay, still too low. Alrighty, well maybe it's 61. So I'll guess 61. And now I exit the loop, and I get this. You win, the number was 61. So in this example, this doesn't fit the for loop very well either, but it works extremely well with a while loop. And the reason is we don't know how many times the person is going to guess before they get to the answer. With the for loop, you sort of need to know how many times you need to do something. But with a while loop, you don't. You can set it up so that it could execute once or 5 or 100 times. So it can be a different amount every time you run it. So here's another example then of the while loop, which is not easily implemented with the for loop. Okay, now let's look at another example. So here's another example that comes into play quite often. So we can use this while loop to repeat a calculation without having to restart the program. I think without is just a single word there. So this is what we call controlling our user input, or giving our user the opportunity to recalculate something over and over again. And this is handy because we can run a calculation repeatedly without having to stop and start our programs. I'm going to use the body mass index example. So to do that, I'm going to use the function that we have done already for the body mass index. So I'll put that here. Now, normally I'd put this at the very top of the program, but the only thing I really have to worry about is I have to have this definition of the function before I call it. So it's okay to put it here. And I'm going to set up a variable called answer. Okay, so I'm just going to copy and paste that line of code here. And I've got a variable called answer, and I'm setting it to an uppercase Y. And why am I doing that? Well, we're going to let our user answer yes or no. So I'm initializing my answer to Y to begin with, and you'll see why I do that. So now let's start to build up our while loop. While the answer is equal to yes, we want to stay in the loop. So we are going to prompt, enter your weight in pounds, enter your height in feet, and enter your height in inches. And I'll convert those to a type float, which you know that's a real number. And I'll save those into the variables WT for weight, FT for feet, INC for inches. Then we need to call the function in order to calculate our body mass index. So let's call the function. So I'll put the code here to do that. So we call the BMI function, we send it the weight and the feet and the inches, and those have to match up since I'm not doing a named call here. So we have weight, feet, inches, and the function, and we're sending it weight and feet and inches. Well, those aren't going to match up because the variables I want are WT here in the main program. Okay, so I need to fix that. I want to send it WT, I want to send it FT, I want to send it INC. So I got the INC right, but the other two were not. So the function will compute the body mass, and then we'll print that back out here. So that's the while loop that does calculation. Now, before I exit this loop, I want to ask, do you want to do another one? You know, maybe we want to enter some data for somebody else and calculate their body mass index. So here's how we do that. So let's put the line of code over here, and it's inside the loop. And I got to line it up to make sure it's inside the loop. So we process one person's information, then we get the output. At the bottom, we're going to ask, do you want to compute another BMI? And we'll give the person a hint that we want them to answer a Y or an N. Okay, then the question mark. Now, just to be careful here, I want to convert whatever the person types to an uppercase because my answer here is an uppercase Y. So if somebody types in a lowercase y, I'll convert it to upper, and then it will match. So I want to make sure I do that. Now, let's try this out. So we'll run the program again, and we'll work our way down to this last example. Okay, so I have already entered the numbers for the first few examples, and including the grade average and the guessing game. So now we're down at the bottom where we're looking at this one. Okay, controlling user input. Enter your weight in pounds. So these are the prompts. So let's type in some weights. Let's say 150. Enter your height in feet. Okay, 5 feet. And let's do 9 inches here. And it computes the body mass index. All right, now in previous programs, the program would have ended at this point. And if we wanted to calculate the body mass index, we'd have to start the program up all over again. But with this while loop, we can prompt with this, do you want another BMI, yes or no? Okay, so we can say yes, and I can put in a lowercase or uppercase y. I'll put in a lowercase, and then it goes back to the top of the loop. Okay, enter your weight in pounds. So we can continue to go through this loop over and over and over again until we enter something that is not the letter Y. I'm using N here, but it could be any letter other than Y, and it would still work just fine. So now we're going to process the body mass index for another person. Okay, so let's put in some new data, say 140, 5, 4. We get the body mass index, and then we get the prompt again. Okay, do you want to do another one? And let's do one more. So I'll type in Y, enter. And, well, I hit a key before I entered the Y, so we did exit there. So that was the same thing as typing in no. All right, so I inadvertently hit something I didn't want to. I think it was a space key. At any rate, I didn't enter a Y, so we did exit the program. So then you see how you can use this while loop in order to make the main content of your program execute repeatedly. So that's another nice feature of the while loop. You can use the while loop pretty much anywhere you'd want to do the for loop. It's just that the for loop has been designed specifically, to work with lists, and it does a really good job at working with lists. Lists are really important in Python, so we typically end up using the for loop a lot more than we would with the while loop. But the while loop is valuable as well, so it has its own special things, and typically, if you're looking at a situation where you do not know how many times the loop needs to execute, then usually you need a while loop in that case. So here are several examples, and we have gone on now just exactly 30 minutes. That's long enough. So let's stop the video right here.